What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 7. Top DFS picks, Week 7.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Oh, and good news, guys. Make sure to stay tuned to the very end of this video because we removed the box that was popping up and blocking the lineup. So now you can see a full lineup using these picks that we made in this video if you stay to the very end. Okay, guys, NFL Week 7. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So you got a few studs in great spots here this week. The most expensive one, who's in a real good spot, is Kyler Murray. He's playing the Houston Texans, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Kyler Murray was only at 2% owned last week, and he put up 26 fantasy points. He had 7 rush attempts, so he's averaging 26.2 fantasy points per game on the season. Now he's projected at 22.1 fantasy points here in Week 7, but now he's 8,500 DraftKings salary. He's 200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Arizona Cardinals favored by 16.5. So that does give me a little bit of caution to play Kyler Murray in a game that could turn into a running game script. So I might pass on Kyler Murray. I might have him in a lineup or something, but I'm going to focus on these next two guys, save a little bit of salary, and I think these guys are in better spots. They have better matchups, and the game script should be a passing game script for these guys. So another smash spot for Patrick Mahomes from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes has averaged 28.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.3 rush attempts per game. He's projected at 28.1 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's 8,400 DraftKings salary, 400 more on FanDuel. So he's actually a little more expensive than Kyler Murray on FanDuel, but he's 100 less on DraftKings. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 56.5 points scored in this game, with the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 4.5. So you got a super high scoring game, a close competitive game, and a fantastic matchup. So I like Patrick Mahomes here versus the Tennessee Titans. But now my favorite quarterback stud out of all these three, it's Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers playing the Washington football team, who have the worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers has averaged 20.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 2.3 rush attempts per game. He's only projected at 19.5 fantasy points here in Week 7, but I think he's going to score over 20 fantasy points in this one. And he's 7,500 DraftKings salary, 400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 9.5. So you got a pretty high scoring game here, a fantastic matchup, and I think this game is going to be within a touchdown for most of the game. The Green Bay Packers might pull ahead right at the end of the game, but I think this one's going to be pretty competitive. And Aaron Rodgers has been super consistent the last 3 weeks, scoring 24, 24, and 24 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Aaron Rodgers here versus the Washington football team. Now, if you're looking for some lower salary quarterbacks, I like Ryan Tannehill from the Tennessee Titans playing the Kansas City Chiefs. He's 6,400 DraftKings salary, and the only reason that I like Ryan Tannehill this week, even though he's only averaging 17.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting 3.2 rush attempts per game, is because the Kansas City Chiefs have the third worst defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 56.5 points scored in this game, with the Tennessee Titans trailing by 4.5. I think the Tennessee Titans are going to be trailing by a touchdown or more throughout almost all of this game. So it's going to be a passing game script. Ryan Tannehill is going to have to pass the ball all game long. So I like Ryan Tannehill here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And if you want to save a ton of salary here at the quarterback position, this is one of my favorite low salary quarterback plays on the slate. Take a look at Matt Ryan from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Miami Dolphins, who have the second worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Matt Ryan has averaged 20 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.4 rush attempts per game. He's projected at 17.5 fantasy points here in week 7, but I think he can score 20 fantasy points or more in this one. And he's only 5,700 DraftKings salary, 1,600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Falcons favored by 2.5. So you got a great matchup here, a close, competitive game, and a defense that's not very good. So I really like this play as a salary saver quarterback. So I like Matt Ryan here versus the Miami Dolphins.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So, of course, you got your stud, Derrick Henry, in a high-scoring game. He's 9,200 DraftKings salary, 1,800 more on FanDuel, averaging 30.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 27 rush attempts per game and 3 pass targets per game. This guy's just been absolutely dominating every game he plays in. His game log, he scored 39, 34, 29, 22, and 51 fantasy points in the last 5 games. So he's the stud running back on the slate. But now I also like Aaron Jones from the Green Bay Packers playing the Washington football team, who have the worst defense overall. They give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. And Aaron Jones has averaged 19 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 13.8 rush attempts per game and 3.8 pass targets per game. He's projected at 17.6 fantasy points here in week 7, and he is 7,500 DraftKings salary, 1,000 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 9.5. So you got a great matchup. And this game could turn into a running game script. Aaron Jones could get a ton of work in the second half. So I like Aaron Jones here versus the Washington football team. Now, if you're looking to save some salary here, take a look at Darrell Henderson Jr. from the LA Rams playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs, and Darrell Henderson Jr. has averaged 18.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16.2 rush attempts per game and 3.2 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 79% of the snaps, projected at 15.6 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 6,600 DraftKings salary, 1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Rams favored by 14.5. So you got a high-scoring game, a fantastic matchup, and a running game script. And the price is right for Darrell Henderson Jr., who got 21 rush attempts and 3 pass targets last week, scored 25 fantasy points. So he's one of my favorite running backs on the slate. So I like Darrell Henderson Jr. here versus the Detroit Lions. Now the other running back that I like is Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Baltimore Ravens, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing running backs. Joe Mixon has averaged 16.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 18.5 rush attempts per game, 2.7 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 65% of the snaps, touches the ball 53% of that time, and he's projected at 16.2 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $6,500 DraftKings salary, only $700 more on FanDuel, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Bengals trailing by 6.5. So I think I like Darrell Henderson Jr. play much better, but my second mid-salary pick would be Joe Mixon here versus the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So of course you got the stud Davante Adams at the top. Let's just go over him real quick. From the Green Bay Packers, playing the Washington football team, who has the worst defense overall, gives up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Davante Adams has averaged 22.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11 targets per game, on the field for 85% of the snaps, projected at 22.5 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $8,900 DraftKings salary, 100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 9.5. So just a fantastic matchup. Looks like this is going to be a good game to stack. Maybe go with a Green Bay Packers stack here versus the Washington football team. So I like Davante Adams here versus the Washington football team. Now the other stud you got on the slate in a great matchup is Tyreek Hill from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 7th worst defense overall, give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Tyreek Hill has averaged 24.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 10.5 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 79% of the snaps, projected at 20.9 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $8,600 DraftKings salary, 100 less on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 56.5 points scored in this game, with the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 4.5. So super high scoring game, great matchup, and a close competitive game. Even though I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be leading by a touchdown for most of this one, Tyreek Hill will no doubt get his damage done. So I like Tyreek Hill here versus the Tennessee Titans.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Now coming down in salary, I like Antonio Brown from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Chicago Bears, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and Antonio Brown has averaged 20.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.4 pass targets per game. He's projected at 14.4 fantasy points
here in week 7. He's 6,300 DraftKings salary, 1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Tampa Bay Bucks favored by 13. Now, Tom Brady just loves passing the ball to Antonio Brown. He's got 13, 8, and 11 pass targets in the last 3 weeks, scoring 24, 34, and 13 fantasy points. Now, it's not the best matchup in the world, and this game could turn into a running game script with a guy like Leonard Fournette. So Leonard Fournette is an interesting running back to consider here, even though it's not a great matchup. But Antonio Brown just seems to get it done every single game. So I like Antonio Brown here versus the Chicago Bears. Okay, now coming down in salary here, this is one of my favorite low salary wide receivers on the slate. I like Jalen Waddle from the Miami Dolphins playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 9th worst defense overall. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Jalen Waddle has averaged 14.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.3 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 81% of the snaps, projected at 12.8 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 5,600 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Dolphins trailing by 2.5. So great matchup here. And Jalen Waddle got 13 pass targets last game, put up 29 fantasy points. Looks like he had his breakout game, and I think they're just going to keep passing the ball to this guy. I think he's going to continue that momentum into this week. So I like Jalen Waddle here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, now a super low salary pick here. I like Darnell Mooney from the Chicago Bears playing the Tampa Bay Bucks, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Darnell Mooney has averaged 10.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.5 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 88% of the snaps, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here in week 7. And he's only 4,600 DraftKings salary, 1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Chicago Bears trailing by 13. So you got a good matchup here in a passing game script. And Darnell Mooney, he had 8, 5, and 7 pass targets in the last 3 games, scoring 16, 7, and 22 fantasy points. So he's heating up. They're passing him the ball. His salary's low. This is going to be a passing game script. He should get a ton of targets in this one, possibly double-digit targets. So I like Darnell Mooney here versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. I like Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Philadelphia Eagles, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Darren Waller has averaged 14.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.8 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 89% of the snaps, projected at 15.8 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 6,700 DraftKings salary, 100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Raiders favored by 3.5. So he's got a good matchup here, and he hasn't really smashed it the past couple of weeks, only scoring 11 and 9 fantasy points for the past 2 weeks off of 5 and 8 pass targets. I just have a feeling it's time for one of those monster Darren Waller games. Everything seems to match up here. A good matchup. I think they're going to get him involved, and he's going to get double-digit pass targets in this one. And his salary's come down because he really hasn't performed all that well the past couple of weeks. His ownership may be dropping. So I like Darren Waller here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And a guy that I might like even more than Darren Waller is Kyle Pitts from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Miami Dolphins, who have the second worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Kyle Pitts has averaged 12.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.2 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 74% of the snaps. He came alive last week or last game with 10 pass targets and 30 fantasy points. He's projected at 13.3 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $5,900 DraftKings salary, 200 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Falcons favored by 2.5. So I think a nice stack here is Matt Ryan and Kyle Pitts. I think he's going to get another double-digit pass target game. I think he's going to have a back-to-back monster game here. So I like Kyle Pitts here versus the Miami Dolphins. So another guy who broke out last week, and his salary's pretty good going into week 7. I like Mike Gesicki from the Miami Dolphins playing the Atlanta Falcons. So I've given you guys a bunch of picks from this game, but I think this could be a good game to stack. I think it's going to be a shootout, and the Atlanta Falcons, they have the 9th worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Mike Gesicki, he's averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7 pass targets per game. He's projected at 11.6 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $4,700 DraftKings salary, $1,300 more on FanDuel. So I like that DraftKings price. And we already know Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Dolphins trailing by 2.5. So I think it's going to be a shootout. I think you could stack this game, go with Waddle, Pitts, Gesicki, play one of the quarterbacks, stack them with some wide receivers, run it back with one of these guys on the other team. I think that would be a pretty solid lineup for this week. So I like Mike Gesicki here versus the Atlanta Falcons.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.